Right now, while you're watching this video, a continent is tearing itself in half. Not metaphorically, not in a million years hypothetically. It's happening today in real time, and scientists are watching it live. In 2005, farmers in a remote part of Ethiopia felt the ground shake for days. When they went to check their fields, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. A crack in the earth over 60 kilometers long had opened up almost overnight. Geologists who rushed to the scene expected to see a process that normally takes hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Instead, they watched the land split open in front of them, like watching a wound tear rather than heal. What they were witnessing wasn't a one-off disaster. It was the opening chapter of something far bigger, the birth of a new ocean, and the slow death of Africa as we know it.
Here's the claim that sounds insane until you check the data. In a few million years, Africa will not be one continent. It will be two. A massive chunk of East Africa, including parts of Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Somalia, and Mozambique, will physically break away from the rest of the continent and drift into the Indian Ocean, becoming its own separate landmass. Somewhere in between, salt water will rush in and fill the gap. Landlocked countries like Uganda and Zambia could one day have coastlines. This isn't science fiction. It's already written into the rock beneath your feet, if your feet happen to be standing anywhere along a scar in the earth called the East African Rift.
So what actually caused that crack in Ethiopia? To answer that, you have to go back further than 2005, back millions of years, to a place most people have never heard of, the Afar Triangle. It sits at the northern tip of Ethiopia, right where the Horn of Africa meets the Red Sea. Geologically, it is one of the strangest places on the planet. It's one of the hottest inhabited regions on Earth, with the surreal acid yellow landscape of the Dalal hydrothermal field, sulfur springs bubbling next to salt flats, and temperatures that regularly climb past 45 degrees Celsius. But the heat isn't the strange part. The strange part is what's happening underneath it.
The Afar Triangle sits exactly on top of what geologists call a triple junction, the meeting point of three separate tectonic plates, all pulling away from each other at the same time. The Nubian plate, the Somali plate, and the Arabian plate all converge right there, and instead of colliding, they're moving apart. It is the only place on the surface of the Earth where you can stand on dry land and be standing directly over an active plate boundary that will one day become an ocean floor. Everywhere else on the planet, that process happens thousands of meters underwater, invisible to us. In Ethiopia, it's happening in the open air, and you can walk right up to it. This is where the story gets even stranger, because for decades, scientists assumed rifting was one of the slowest processes on Earth, something that unfolds in tiny, imperceptible increments over unimaginable stretches of time. Then came the Dabahu rifting episode. Over just a few days in September 2005, a series of powerful earthquakes hit the Afar region. Villagers described the ground trembling continuously, not as a single shock, but as a rolling, days-long tremor. When the shaking stopped, a fissure had opened that would normally have taken an estimated few hundred years to form. Researchers led by geophysicist Cynthia Ebinger and her team discovered that magma had surged up from deep underground and forced the crust apart in one violent pulse, doing centuries of geological work in less than 2 weeks. That discovery changed how scientists understood continental rifting entirely. It wasn't a slow, gradual creep. It could happen in dramatic bursts, magma-driven events that rip the crust apart the same way an ocean ridge splits open on the seafloor. And here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. The Dabahu event wasn't an isolated incident. It was one segment in a rift system that stretches roughly 3,000 miles, from the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden in the north, all the way down through Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, and Mozambique in the south. The entire eastern edge of Africa is stitched together by this fracture, and it has been quietly widening for the last 25 million years. You can actually see the evidence of this ancient ongoing violence all over East Africa. Most people just don't know what they're looking at. Ever seen a photo of Mount Kilimanjaro or Mount Kenya?
Both are volcanoes, and both exist because of the rift. As the crust stretches and thins, it creates pathways for magma to rise, feeding volcanic activity along the entire rift zone. The famous Great Lakes of East Africa, Lake Malawi, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Turkana, sit inside deep basins that were carved out as the land pulled apart and sank between two parallel fault lines, a process geologists call Rift Valley Formation. Lake Tanganyika alone plunges to depths of nearly 1,500 meters, making it the second deepest lake on Earth, a direct result of the crust splitting and dropping beneath it.
Now, here's where the story pulls back to something even more personal, because this rift isn't just reshaping rock, it's reshaping human history in ways scientists are still uncovering. The Great Rift Valley in East Africa is often called the cradle of humanity, and that's not just a poetic phrase. Some of the most important fossil discoveries in human evolution, including the 3.2 million-year-old skeleton known as Lucy, were unearthed in the Afar region, almost directly on top of the rift itself. Some researchers argue that the shifting landscapes and changing climates caused by rift activity, forests giving way to open savanna as the land stretched and dropped, may have driven early human ancestors to adapt, stand upright, and eventually evolve into us. In other words, the same geological process now tearing Africa apart might be the reason human beings exist at all.
So how does this all end? Geologists studying the rift generally agree on the broad outcome, even if the exact timeline is debated. As the Nubian and Somali plates continue drifting apart at a rate of a few millimeters per year, roughly the speed your fingernails grow, the rift will keep widening. Eventually, in an estimated 5 to 10 million years, the crust in the Afar region will thin so much that it fully ruptures, and the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden will pour in to flood the entire Rift Valley. At that point, the Somali plate, carrying with it Somalia, eastern Ethiopia, eastern Kenya, and parts of Tanzania and Mozambique, will officially separate from the rest of Africa and become its own island continent, drifting slowly into the Indian Ocean. A brand new ocean will exist where a valley used to be.
It sounds almost too big to be real, a continent splitting in two like something out of a disaster film. But the proof isn't speculation. It's already visible on the ground. Satellite radar measurements have confirmed the crust in the Afar region continues to stretch year after year. New volcanic fissures keep appearing along the same rift line that tore open in 2005. Seismologists monitor the area constantly because the same forces that will eventually create an ocean also mean ongoing earthquakes and volcanic activity for the millions of people who live along the rift today. For them, this isn't a distant future scenario. It's a present physical risk built into the landscape they call home. What's genuinely wild is that most of us grew up learning that continents are fixed, permanent shapes. The borders on a map feel like facts of nature. But Africa is living proof that no landmass is ever really finished. The same tectonic forces that once tore apart an ancient supercontinent called Pangaea, giving us the 7 continents we know today, never actually stopped. They're just slower than a human lifetime can perceive, except in places like the Afar Triangle, where for a few days in 2005, the Earth decided to move at a pace we could actually watch. Somewhere in East Africa right now, that crack is still widening, millimeter by millimeter, writing the outline of a coastline that doesn't exist yet, on a continent that won't look the same by the time it's finished.
If this kind of deep time, this is actually happening right now, science fascinates you as much as it fascinates me, let me know in the comments which future geological event you'd want covered next. Because honestly, this rift is only one of several places on Earth quietly rewriting the map.